Proper selection and use of personal protection equipment, or PPE, is key in reducing potential pesticide exposures. PPE selection is the first step to understand, but you also need to know how to properly care for it and how to store and dispose of PPE. PPE requirements are determined by the toxicity and formulation of the pesticide, as well as the activity you're performing. Remember in Chapter 5 on hazards that you can reduce hazards by reducing exposure. Since some pesticide handling activities increase the chance of exposure, the label may require more PPE at times to reduce the overall hazard. Mixing and loading are some of the most hazardous activities and require the most PPE. So read the label. It states the minimum PPE requirements. There may be certain requirements for handlers who are mixer loaders, other requirements for applicators, and even another set for early entry agricultural workers. When it comes to PPE, you can always exceed the label requirements. You can wear more PPE. The label clearly states whether PPE needs to be chemical resistant. Let's review what chemical resistant means. Chemical resistant PPE material prevents most chemicals from reaching the skin. You must protect from dermal exposure. There are many different types of chemical resistant materials, including butyl and nitrile rubber, PVC plastic, and non-woven coated fabrics. Due to the different toxicities and formulation of products on the market, different labels require different levels of protection. The label may require chemical-resistant gloves, hat, boots, and coveralls or rain suit. When chemical-resistant materials degrade, they stop providing protection. If your gloves change color, become spongy, brittle, swollen, jelly-like, or crack, replace them. Gloves are cheap, especially when compared to your health and safety. Replace your gloves often. Cotton, denim, and leather gloves, hats, and boots are not chemical resistant and they absorb pesticides. Although work clothing made from these materials is much more comfortable, it shouldn't be worn when making applications. Save your leather work boots and cotton ball cap for when you're not working around pesticides. Okay, now we'll look at what PPE is available and when you should wear what. At a minimum, your PPE should include a long-sleeved shirt, long trousers or coveralls, gloves, shoes, plus socks and a hat. Remember, you can always wear more PPE than the label requires. A variety of coverall designs and materials are available. Wear coveralls over clothing and make sure zippers are zipped all the way up and covered. If you're wearing a two-piece coverall, the top should extend well below your waist and should not be tucked in. Coveralls may vary in their level of protection from cotton to Tyvek, which is water resistant, and to other chemical resistant suits. Chemical resistant suits can lose their ability to protect you over time from chemical exposure. These suits are made of rubber or plastic and can be very warm, especially on hot days. To avoid heat stress when wearing chemical resistant suits, remember to drink lots of water and take frequent breaks. As I mentioned before, mixing and loading are the most hazardous activities you can perform when working with pesticides. If you're mixing and loading or cleaning equipment, make certain that you're well protected. Wearing a chemical-resistant apron that extends from the neck to below the knees is not only a good idea, but many times it's required by the label. Most pesticide exposure occurs through your skin or from dermal exposure. Because your hands are most likely to be exposed, always wear gloves when working with pesticides. Remember, during mixing and loading, you're working with concentrated product, so don't forget your gloves. Check the pesticide label and make sure your gloves are made of the appropriate material. No matter what material they are made of, gloves should be unlined and waterproof. To avoid having pesticides drip into your gloves when you're spraying overhead, Tuck your sleeves inside the gloves and fold the cuffs up to prevent pesticide spray from dripping into the gloves. If your spray job requires a lot of movement between overhead and waist level spraying, use duct tape to secure your gloves and the sleeves of your coveralls to prevent pesticide exposure. What's wrong with these gloves? Although these gloves may be more comfortable for extended wear, lining in a glove absorbs pesticide, and the glove holds the pesticide contaminant close to the skin. Plus, they're impossible to clean. For the same reason, never use absorbent cotton gloves when applying pesticides. The entire glove absorbs pesticide and fails to provide you any protection. Gloves are the most important piece of personal protective equipment. Wearing gloves can reduce dermal exposure by 99%. There's an exception, however. Methyl bromide and other fumigant gases can become trapped inside gloves or even boots. The fumigant next to your skin can actually cause burns. Make sure you read the label and take care of your PPE. So what can happen if you don't wear gloves? Fluorescent tracer dye studies have shown that without gloves there can be a significant amount of exposure when handling pesticides. Looking at these hands under normal light, the hands look clean and uncontaminated. However, with a black light, you can clearly see the large amount of dye contaminant. Just think if that was not dye he was exposed to, but a pesticide. That's a lot of exposure. Also, what will he touch with those filthy hands? The simple act of wearing appropriate gloves greatly reduces pesticide exposure. What's wrong with this picture? They have the gloves on, but their entire forearm is exposed. Wear long-sleeved shirts and wear gloves inside the shirt cuffs when making applications on the ground or below your waist. Once again, read the label. It provides information about the required personal protective equipment. Make certain you wear the minimum amount of PPE for the activity that you're performing. Footwear is an important piece of PPE. It's common sense that sandals don't provide adequate protection when applying pesticides. Wearing unlined rubber boots are best, even though a label may only require shoes plus socks. Rubber boots can be rinsed inside and out and should normally be removed before entering a building to reduce the possibility of tracking pesticides into a home or building. Wear pant legs on the outside of the boots to prevent pesticides from entering the boots and pooling at the bottom of the boot. Although leather work boots may be more comfortable and practical for much of your work, avoid wearing them when applying pesticides. Leather is an absorbent material and can lead to extended, continuous exposure. Wearing leather work boots is just like wearing cotton gloves. Don't do it when you're making pesticide applications. For some applications, pesticide exposure can occur on the scalp or the back of the neck. A liquid-proof hat with a wide brim reduces pesticide exposure to the head and the back of the neck. You know those baseball caps that people wear to support their favorite sports team, pesticide, or place of employment? What are they made of? Yep, cotton or some other cloth material. Like cotton gloves and leather boots, cloth caps can absorb pesticide. Caps would be inappropriate for overhead applications and applications with lots of fine droplets that remain airborne. Remember, any absorbent material in a hat, such as a hat tie under the chin or a headband, can absorb pesticide and keep it trapped next to the skin. Chemical-resistant hoods on jackets are another good alternative to protect the head and neck during pesticide applications. During mixing and loading, the applicator is working with pesticide concentrates, and there's a possibility of splashback. Protect your eyes, which are very absorbent. Read the pesticide label to determine if eyewear is required. Dusts and toxic chemicals usually require eye protection. Eyewear should provide protection on the sides, too. Make sure the eye protection you're using is adequate for the material you're mixing. For example, Eye protection that is suitable for dusts is not always suitable for liquids. Eye protection includes safety glasses, face shield, or goggles. Goggles and safety glasses don't protect the rest of your face. Under the Agricultural Worker Protection Standard, if the label requires that goggles be worn to protect the eyes, then clean water for washing the eye or an eye wash dispenser must be readily available. Under the Worker Protection Standard, eye decontamination stations are required, as well as portable eye washes that can be carried into the field. Whether the law requires an eye wash or not, it's a good idea to keep one handy when making pesticide applications. Respirators are personal protective equipment that helps protect against pesticide exposure through the respiratory system. If pesticides are inhaled, they can easily and quickly enter the bloodstream through the lungs. Make certain that you're not getting exposed through your respiratory system. When should an applicator use a respirator? Check the label. If a respirator is required, there's a reason. Wear it. If you're going to be exposed to fine spray particles that could be inhaled, the pesticide user should wear a respirator. When working in confined spaces, a respirator may be needed. If the pesticide is delivered as a dust, gas, vapor, or fumigant, it's possible that the applicator could breathe in the fine particles or gases. Respirators, when worn correctly, help prevent pesticide exposure through the inhalation. There are several types of respirators that are classified as air purifying respirators. These respirators do not supply air, but rather remove contaminants from the air breathed in through the respirator. Dust masks or mechanical filter respirators remove particulate matter from the air. Chemical cartridge respirators and gas masks have chemical-specific cartridges to remove chemicals from the air before it enters your respiratory system. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, is the federal agency that approves respirators for pesticide use and assigns a TC number. The pesticide label refers to the appropriate TC number. Chemical cartridge and canister respirators are available as either full-face and half-face masks. The advantage of a full-face respirator is that you also have eye protection. No matter what type of respirator you use, make sure it fits and you have the right cartridges. The cartridges are chemical specific, so check the label of the pesticide product for the required filter or cartridges. If the respirator doesn't fit, it doesn't work. Another type of respirator is an air-supplying respirator. Air-supplying respirators are used in a low-oxygen environment, such as in a grain elevator where a fumigant application may be needed. With an air-supplying respirator or self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, the user carries around all the clean air they breathe in a tank. You better be finished with the job before the clean air supply is gone. Which type of respirator is this? It's an air-purifying respirator, a chemical cartridge respirator. This is also a full-face respirator providing eye protection as well. Works great outdoors where there's plenty of air. Would it be appropriate for low oxygen areas? No, they only work where there is plenty of oxygen to breathe. Remember, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, is the federal agency that requires respirators for chemical protection. Read the label and talk to your safety supplier to determine which cartridge or filter is required for the pesticide product that's to be handled. Respirators must be properly fit tested and maintained to provide the necessary protection. If a respirator doesn't fit properly, it doesn't work. Fit check your respirator prior to each use to make certain that you have a tight seal. Make sure the intake and exhaust valves are working properly. If you can taste or smell the product through the respirator, or if breathing is more difficult, it's time to change filters. At a minimum, Replace filters according to state regulations or manufacturer recommendations. Before wearing a respirator, get a medical examination to make sure you can safely wear one. Fit test respirators prior to its first use. Make sure it fits properly. If you change anything on the facepiece, fit test the respirator again before it's used. After that, fit test your respirator at least once a year. Some states have more restrictive requirements on respirator use. Check for these prior to using a respirator. It's important to conduct a qualitative fit test prior to the first use of a respirator. In a qualitative fit test, the wearer is exposed to odors, irritants, and taste agents. During this exposure period, the wearer breathes and moves in different positions, just like they might do during a normal work day. If the wearer notices any odor or taste leaking into the mask, the respirator doesn't have a good seal, and this means the respirator is not providing protection against pesticide exposure. Another type of respirator fit test is the quantitative fit test. In the quantitative fit test, a special instrument compares the concentration of dust particles inside and outside the respirator. The comparison ratio is called the fit factor. It's also important that the wearer moves during this test, as they did for the qualitative fit test. The instrument continues to measure the particle concentration to determine if the respirator has a good seal or if it's allowing particles to leak in. Do a qualitative or quantitative fit test anytime you change respirators and at least once a year. Make sure you fit check your respirator each time you put it on. Before each use, check the respirator's seal by doing a positive pressure check. To do a positive pressure check, place your hand over the exhalation valve and breathe out gently. If you feel the mask tightening around your face, you have a good fit. The air you're exhaling is filling the mask, and you don't have any leaks between the mask and your face. The other test you need to do is a negative pressure check. For a negative pressure check, place your hands over the inhalation valves. Inhale and hold your breath for 10 seconds. If no air moves out around the seal, the respirator fits properly. Different facial features, scars, and facial hair don't allow for a good respirator seal. A properly maintained respirator provides protection from pesticide exposure. After each use, remove the filters and wash the facepiece. Store filters in a sealed bag in a clean, dry location, and mark the bag with how many hours the cartridges or filter were used. When you're using a respirator, pay attention. If you smell or taste a contaminant, get to fresh air immediately. Your respirator may not be working properly, and you may be having a pesticide exposure. Other indications that your respirator may not be providing protection are eye, nose, or throat irritation, difficulty breathing, or the air becomes uncomfortably warm. If any of these occur, or if you become nauseous or dizzy, get to fresh air. Not only do you need to keep your respirator clean, but you need to maintain all your personal protective equipment so that it continues to protect you. At the end of each day, discard disposable or worn PPE pieces. Wash all other PPE, including your gloves, inside and out. Launder personal clothing worn as personal protective equipment at the end of each day. Separate pesticide-contaminated clothing from your family laundry. To decontaminate personal protective clothing, wash it in hot water with detergent. Let's take a minute and talk about washing clothes. First, wash any clothing that could be contaminated with pesticides separately from all other household laundry. Use a heavy-duty liquid detergent if you've been working with emulsifiable concentrates. If the clothing has been moderately or heavily contaminated with pesticides, wash it twice. If you think it won't get clean, dispose of it through a household hazardous waste program. Make certain to always rinse the washing machine with an empty load so that no family laundry becomes contaminated from any residue in the washer. Ideally, hang the clothing outside to allow the sun to break down any pesticide residues still found on the clothing. Never store personal protective equipment in the same place you store pesticides. Otherwise, the PPE worn to protect you from pesticide exposure will be contaminated. To protect you, PPE must be clean. Protect yourself when mixing and loading. Label PPE requirements are most restrictive for these activities. When you apply, you need protection as well, but the clothing requirements found on labels may be different. Also, don't forget to wear PPE when doing maintenance on contaminated equipment. Unplugging a nozzle is a good example of equipment maintenance. Don't forget to put your PPE back on to work on equipment. Oh, and never blow into the nozzle to try and remove the obstruction. Instead, carry an old toothbrush with you for these situations and use it to clean out the nozzle. It's probably a good idea to carry extra nozzles with you and simply replace the non-working nozzle with one that works, and worry about cleaning the clogged nozzle after you finish spraying. Develop good habits and protect yourself from pesticide exposure. Personal protective equipment is required for one reason: to protect the handler or applicator from unnecessary and potentially harmful pesticide exposure. But PPE only works if you wear it. Check the label and make sure the PPE you're using meets the label requirements. Don't forget about protecting your eyes and respiratory system. If you're using a respirator, make sure you have an annual fit test and that you fit check it each time. Lastly, you can always wear more PPE than required by the label. Question 1. Who must legally follow personal protective equipment instructions on the pesticide label? 1. Applicators. 2. Mixer loaders. 3. Early entry agricultural workers. 4. Hand-picking harvest crew. A. 1 only. B. 1 and 2 only. C. 1, 2, and 3 only. D. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Answer is C. Any person who handles pesticides or re-enters a treated area prior to the end of the restricted entry interval must wear appropriate PPE. Question 2. A pesticide label may require a respirator be worn for personal protection when handling the pesticide product. Which of the following are types of air purifying respirators? 1. Chemical cartridge respirators. 2. Gas masks. 3. Self-contained breathing apparatus. 4. Supplied air respirators. A. 1 and 2 only. B. 2 and 3 only. C. 3 and 4 only. D. 2 and 4 only. Answer: A. Both chemical cartridge and gas mask respirators purify air you breathe through the filter. Both 3 and 4 supply air directly. Question 3. Where does most pesticide exposure occur for pesticide handlers? A. Eyes. B. Hands. C. Forearms. D. Feet. Answer: B. This presentation was authored by Carrie Foss, Becky Hines, Carol Ramsey, and Brett Johnson of Washington State University, Urban IPM and Pesticide Safety Education. The illustrations in this presentation were provided by the Nevada Department of Agriculture, the University of Missouri-Lincoln, Virginia Tech, the Washington Department of Agriculture, and Washington State University. Presentations were reviewed by Beth Long, University of Tennessee, Ed Crow, Maryland Department of Agriculture, Gene Kasai, the U.S. EPA, and Susan Whitney King, University of Delaware. Narration was provided by Drex Rhodes, Washington State University Information Department.